There we go. So welcome everybody. I'm Heather Lorenz. I'm the Visual Arts Manager at the Northfield Arts Guild. Welcome to this virtual reception for both Nature Seen and Unseen and for Paint a Portrait of Your Pet exhibitions. So welcome, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank the Minnesota State Arts Board for their generous support of the Guild. And thank you to Rebound Enterprises for sponsoring our entire 2020-21 season of gallery exhibitions. And finally, a huge thank you to all of our members, donors, sponsors, and our members. Your support makes it possible for us to continue making great art happen in our community. So thank you so much. I'm going to flip to that next slide. All three artists that we're celebrating tonight are Minnesota State Arts Board grant recipients. And so it just happened that they were all going for it, and they said, you have the space? And we said, absolutely. We love showcasing artists in all points of their artistic journey. And Anne Rynearson and Mary Welke are each fiscal year 2020 recipients of an Artist Initiative grant. And Julie Fakler is a fiscal year 2021 recipient of a Creative Support for Individuals grant. And we are very proud to be celebrating them tonight, and congrats on being grant recipients from Minnesota State Arts Board. So how's this event going to go? First, I'm going to welcome you, and we're going to go through a series of exhibition photos so you can see how the whole show looks. Then each of the participating artists are going to share a little bit about their work and their process alongside a slideshow of their work, followed by a question and answer session. And throughout the event, if you are hearing from the artists and you have a question for them, please put it in the chat box, and we will get to all those questions at the end of the event and give all the artists an opportunity to answer those questions then. So in that same box, if you would like to send any personal messages to the artists, you can send them your well wishes during this event. They'll be able to see it. You can choose either all panelists or individually to them. So I would encourage you to send them your messages. So Nature Seen and Unseen features recent paintings by Anne Rynearson and mixed media pieces by Mary Welke. And this show has been in development for more than 18 months. And it was really fun when we were first talking about this concept, and both of them were wanting to see if we had a place for them if they're going for this grant. And if they got it, would we have a space to show? Absolutely. Both of them were dealing with the concept of nature. And so it was really fun to see how the different approaches that they were taking on this common theme. And you'll see that even though their approaches are very different, this shared concept is visible in both of their works. Especially when they're shown together, you can see the relationships. So some of the work that you see here, I'm in the gallery right now. And I hope throughout this reception, you will see these commonalities in the work by these artists, from the organic shapes in Anne's paintings to the actual organic matter that's in Mary Welke's mixed media pieces. And we're really thankful to these artists for joining us tonight and sharing their talents with us. This is the time that we're going to open up the floor and hear from each of the artists, and they're going to share a little bit more about themselves. Anne, this is where you're coming up. Anne Rynearson is interested in natural processes and forms and draws from her research of cosmology, philosophy, mysticism, and symbolism to inform her paintings. Please welcome Anne to share us more about her work.
Thank you, Heather. And I want to say thank you to the Northfield Arts Guild for allowing me to show my work in this space. It is definitely a privilege And also, of course, thanks to the Minnesota State Arts Board for providing the grant for artists so that we can continue to make our work and explore ideas and themes that may not be possible, may not be always accepted in a commercial venue. And so it's really great to have that opportunity in Minnesota to do that. Well, my work in the show was based on, as Heather said, an interest in nature. And this was sort of a takeoff from, leading off from a previous series I did that was very much about nature and the environment, but it sort of took a shift and it went into a little different direction for me. And I started to really be interested in kind of an unseen side of nature, something that had to do with things that we kind of know are there, but we can't really necessarily experience. So things that relate to microcosms, the very smallest of things that are inside of us and around us, to the very biggest things that are in the universe and beyond. And also some of the themes kind of took on metaphysical and spiritual connotations, as well as like interest in different elements of science and physics. So there's kind of a lot of things that I was exploring in this work. This particular series is still an ongoing series, and so I'm still creating works that relate to each other. A lot of these pieces are elements of different ideas, and they all sort of relate to each other, but they may not be, they may have a different appearance from one another, because I was trying to experiment with different forms, patterns, ways of making the paintings. The paintings, almost all of them, or pretty much all of them, are using acrylic materials. In my early years, I used to be an avid oil painter, and I sort of moved away from that in part because of the toxicity of oil paints and solvents. I couldn't really tolerate it anymore. And so I decided to try acrylics. And acrylics now these days are wonderful because you can do so much with them. There's so many really interesting mediums and ways to apply acrylics. So I really tried to take advantage of that with this body of work. Some things that I experimented with the work, besides I still love to paint with brushes in a very sort of traditional way. I love glazing, like I used to do with oil paints, you know, applying imagery and then applying like transparent glazes and then layering again with other forms. So I still do that with acrylics, but I also incorporated other things like creating stencils with Duralar. So I would cut out shapes, and I have an airbrush. And so I tried spraying different shapes, as well as with the acrylics, I tried out different kinds of acrylics, such as interference through golden paints. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of an interesting paint. It has little bits of mica in it, which produce this kind of shimmery effect. And they come in different colors. So it actually produces, it's called interference because if you have, like, let's say a blue interference, if the light hits it in a certain way, you'll get sort of an orangey reflection with it. So that I thought was an interesting concept in terms of looking at the piece and having this kind of feeling that it was changeable and perhaps shifting in a way, which conceptually, I was sort of thinking with a lot of these pieces with the layering and all of this stuff going on, that it was kind of a bit of chaos, and there's always something going on with the pieces that keep your eye moving. And I sort of wanted that on purpose, just to kind of have this feeling that you're always looking around the whole piece all the time. So Heather was just passing, the first one that she showed was called Watcher. That was one of the first ones I did in the series that had, I did some drawing with a kind of a parabola shape, which is where you make curves with all straight lines. And it sort of produced this like eye-like shape in the middle, which I thought was interesting. And then all of the little dots initially were produced by splattering paint, which I came back and refined them more into these little kind of pearl-like shapes. And that's one thing I should say too, with all of these pieces, we're showing them in kind of a linear fashion here, but when I created them, they all were sort of back and forth. I would, you know, create pieces and then leave them and then come back to them and work on something else. And I found like, for me, it created this kind of relationship and interaction among all the different pieces in the end. But you can move on to the next one. This one, again, was one of the first ones that I used stenciling with all the little round shapes and did the airbrushing. And I also incorporated other marks with Sharpies and layered more acrylics. It was kind of just a, you know, throw everything in, let's see what we get kind of thing, which is kind of scary to see what you're going to get. But in the end, it's really interesting when you can pull something together and it actually kind of works. But I don't know if you want to talk about concepts. I guess we can go back to that later. But this third piece, Labyrinth, in a way is sort of symbolic, I think, of this series of work that I'm creating and going into. The idea of a labyrinth and this idea that I think we know that a labyrinth is kind of like a maze. And this idea of a maze or painting as a maze is interesting to me, of something that has this intertwining effect visually and conceptually, but that the painting, all these different layers are like a maze to me, how they interact and how I develop the work. But just as a concept, I love that idea of something that's sort of like a journey that you kind of discover as you go. So in a way, it's symbolic to me in that way. This particular piece I was experimenting with also with metallic paint as well, just for the effects of how light would reflect on it. Sorry, you can move on. The next piece, Plane of Imminence, was another one of those pieces that I kind of thought was dead. I painted it, it was one of the beginning paintings, and I sort of gave up on it. But then I came back and I thought, I sort of saw within it an opportunity to really start applying more geometric pattern intentionally in the work, which is really kind of starting to become a really dominant thing in my work, pretty bold geometric patterns, but yet the pattern is, I really like the idea of sort of the background coming through again. So the pattern is fractured. It's not necessarily like hard geometric work. So I feel like it's embedded in there in the work, but there's other things coming through and going on as well. The next piece, Apocalypse, is sort of the same sort of thing, where it was a piece that I had begun and I had all these, it was a completely different painting, but it ended up being this with the pattern, and I named it Apocalypse because of course everything that's going on, but Apocalypse also means a new beginning. And for me, I felt like this was one of the pieces that was rounding out the year. And I felt like I was really ready, you know, for a new beginning and a fresh start. And I felt like it was appropriate, and it just had that kind of feeling of being enveloped in something as well. The next piece, Shangri-La, was another piece that, you know, I really was experimenting with these kind of intuitive shapes. And this actually began with a lot of splattering, which I formed into these other more specific shapes that you see with the little dots and the red spiraling. And then I incorporated the diamond pattern afterward to create another element to the piece. Sorry. I really enjoyed with painting too that there's some perspective in my piece, but they're very flattened, and because I really like to keep, you know, the focus up front with my work, and I like that dynamic quality with the bold pattern and the color. And the next piece, Portal, again, this one sort of relates to some of the earlier pieces, I feel like, with kind of the hidden patterns. And also what I was talking to about initially with the microcosm and the macrocosm idea, that something could seem kind of infinite, but it also could be something very intimate as well. And the shape reminded me of a portal. This one, Ghost Eye, don't necessarily ask me what it exactly means, but this one I sort of was thinking about, I don't know if you guys ever saw Coraline. My daughter loved that movie when she was a kid, and they had the little ghost eye things that they had to find. And I was just sort of thinking that as this kind of like a thing that would allow someone to see something that they may not normally see. And so this became this kind of cosmic looking painting with this overlaid glazed pattern that's fairly transparent, that's kind of there and not there, sort of an after image in a way. The next piece, Ariadne's Thread, the title is based on the famous Greek story about Ariadne and Theseus, and again, that labyrinth theme kind of coming in, where she left the string for Theseus to find his way out through the labyrinth to escape from the Minotaur, but that's just sort of a backstory. But this was one of those pieces too where I was really experimenting with glazing and splattering paint, and then sort of reading the tea leaves, so to speak, to find the form of the painting and the structure of the painting as I went along. And this is what I ended up with. And the last piece, Vortex Petal, this is one that a painting, this title of this painting has been in my head forever. But I felt like when I ended this piece, it was kind of, again, sort of appropriate for how I was feeling at the time with what's been going on, and just this kind of overwhelming feeling of, you know, feeling like you're kind of, you know, overwhelmed by the situation that's going on. But again, it was just with my other pieces, you know, incorporating this kind of patterning with the intuitive paint pouring and this back and forth of layering to see what would happen in the end. And so it was kind of a fun painting to do. But so basically that's the pieces I have in the show. You know, all of these pieces in terms of themes, they're, like I said, they're related, but they're kind of like individual pieces as well with their own little backstory. And the titles of my pieces are just sort of like kind of a hint at a narrative, you know, like when I have specific titles like Plane of Imminence, that's a real sort of philosophical term, but I always think it's fun for people maybe to go do some research. Maybe it might give you some other ideas of some other things I was thinking about, but anyway, I'm trying to think of what else I should talk about. Any questions?
Thank you, Anne. That's just, it's wonderful to hear about how see how it progressed. And even though you said it wasn't linear, you were working back and forth, it's just really fun to see how the concepts that you were working on simultaneously, and they really do work together as a series. Like you can see that common thread through them. So thanks so much. And we definitely had some wonderful comments in the chat box as you were presenting. So I would encourage folks, if you have some questions specifically for Anne, please put them in there because we will do questions at the end. So thank you so much, Anne. Gonna go, next we're gonna hear from Mary. And if I can get my slideshow to go, there we go. So Mary Welke's mixed media paintings explore both the physicality and fragile nature of prairie renewal, farmland restoration, and soil health as she interprets these ideas into her latest art techniques. And so I'm going to say, welcome, Mary, and please unmute yourself and go for it.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank the Minnesota State Arts Board and Northfield Arts Guild for sponsoring this exhibit. And I'd like to welcome all the participants tonight, and thank you to the other artists. First image, please. My project started here with, when I learned about prairie burns and farmland burns, I was fascinated with the process because my art is about nature and things in nature. So I love the idea of this rejuvenation of the soil and the prairie through these burns. And I thought how interesting it would be to do a body of work incorporating some of these ideas like fire and ash and organic prairie material into my work. And I thought, well, this could be an interesting journey. Next image, please. So I started out the idea of fire. I had to learn some new skills, and this year has been a journey of learning new skills and learning about the soil and the farmland and the prairies. One of my new skills, I wanted to incorporate fire into my work, so I had to learn how to use a torch. So here I am learning to use the torch on a canvas with fabric. I learned how to work a little bit with collaging fabrics. It's something I don't normally do. And so it's just a matter of experimenting and growing and trying things, going out in the field, observing and coming back and trying different things. Next, please. So these are two examples of pieces I created, both incorporating the torch as a medium and paint and collaging of fabrics. The piece on the right is also incorporates photo transfer techniques, the farmer in the top and the little house in the background. The burlap fabric has been torched. I attached pieces of prairie grasses to this image. There's a corrugated cardboard fence line, and it shows a connection or the symbiotic relationship between the farm fields and the farmers and the prairie buffer zones that surround and are near the farms. Next, please. So one of the questions that I had to ask myself when I started this project was, how am I going to apply all these materials to my canvases? This is new for me. So I did these series of experiments and learning how to actually make the ash and residue attached to the canvas. It's almost like you're trying to attach dust to a canvas. So I had to experiment with that, and these are some of the experiments. Next, please. So here, these are enlargements of two of the images you just saw from the group you just saw. The one on the left here is the handmade paper at the top, and the middle section is created from corn stalks that I collected from a field. And then the bottom part is a worn, used gunny sack. The image on the right, the black one, is actual prairie ash from a burn, a controlled burn. I collected a box of the ash, and the circular forms are reminiscent of what you see when after a field has been torched. Sometimes you see these black spots in the ground, and they're like plugs or wicks, I call them. And what they are is the groups of the prairie plants. They're like clumps of plants, and you can see that when they're all burned out. And then they get scorched to the ground. but all their roots are safe underneath the ground, and that's what will begin the renewal in the future. Next, please. Another thing I had to explore was using collage, fabric collage. So in order to just feel a little more comfortable with that, I thought I would make these small pieces and explore shape and form. And I suddenly realized that what I started to create were these little silos in these grain elevators. And it was a kind of an intuitive thing because I was using simple shapes. Next, please. So this is a grouping of what those works ended up looking like. And I call these my temples of grain. And I think of the grain that's harvested from the farmer's field and this commodity, how important it is. It's, it gets transported around the world to be used for different things, for animals and people and different products that we all rely on. Next, please. I work intuitively, and I observe. I made a lot of field trips and looked at farms and prairies, but I work from my memory and from my creative expression or interpretation of what I see and feel. So the piece on the left is called Prairie Tempest, and the pieces on the right are really interesting, and this it excites me a lot because the pieces on the right are called field and fence line studies. And these are made spontaneously, but what they are is they're the areas that what I think of as an unseen area, but an important area. It's the area between the farmland and the prairie, or the edge of the farmland, where you sometimes have the ditches, where the road might come up to it, or it's where the prairie begins. And it's in these sort of no man's land that you see these broken down fences, but you see the organic material, the prairie grasses and wildflowers. And it's also a really important habitat for small animals, birds and flowers, or bees and other things. Next, please. So I did 3 large paintings on the seasons. And this first one is 5 feet in height and 4 feet in width. And this is spring and summer. And it's showing the prairie and also the roots below the ground. And I used gunny sacks, strips of gunny sacks, to create the stems and the roots. And the one thing that I think is really fascinating is some of these prairie grasses go down really deep into the soil. And like buffalo grass goes down as long as 20 feet into the soil. And this helps stop erosion and enrich the soil. Above the ground, you have the prairie wildflowers. And I created them from clumps of dried up acrylic paint that was like laying around in my studio. Next, please. And here are the other 2. The one on the left is called Harvest Yield, and the one on the right is Winter Fallow. These are the same size, and they're talking again about the farmland and the prairie buffer zones near the next door, alongside the farmland. Next, please. And this, I'm very excited about this. I had the opportunity to meet with Dave Legvold, who lives in Northfield, Minnesota. And he is a commercial restorative farmer. And Dave was gracious enough to take me around his farm and teach me about farmland and something about farm and prairies and water conservation. And this image is Dave's hand, and he dug a clump of soil out of the ground. And he's teaching me here about how the soil needs to be damp like clay. And a good piece of soil will have the organic material mixed in with it. And you should be able to see the wormholes and how important it is for the worms to be able to crawl through there and add oxygen to the soil and nutrients to the soil. And the reason he pointed this out to me is he said some farmers, their soil is only good for like 1 or 2 inches deep. And then below that, it's like concrete. You can't get any deeper. So as a result, their crops have very short roots, and maybe they're not as healthy as they could be. So Dave makes it a point to go 8 inches deep into the soil, so his worms have a lot of room to move around and add nutrients to the soil, and also to improve the help stop erosion. Next, please. One of the other things I learned how to do this year was to make handmade paper. So here's an example of one of my sheets of paper, and when it was still wet. And so as you can see how beautiful it is, it has the prairie grasses and the wildflower petals and seeds in it. And I was so excited to take this paper back to my studio to let it dry so I could use it, incorporate it into my paintings and use it as a collage tool, I guess. And so I took it back, and then when I returned to my studio, my papers had totally transformed themselves, and they became these crispy, thin, undulating, kind of fragile objects. And they had their own sense of integrity. And I just couldn't bear the thought of tearing them up and flattening them out onto a painting or a collage. And so I decided that I would leave them alone, because these are the reminders, that if all I would have to do is mist them and add some water to them, and they would relax their form, and then they would come back to their beautiful, colorful shape, and the bearers of life and rejuvenation and regeneration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Oh, that was really fun to hear about all the experimenting you did. And you really do see all of that, the prairie restoration and the soil health and all of that really come through in all of your work. And so thank you so much. There were some questions that came up and some comments that came up in the chat box. I'm going to invite folks again that are in attendance. Please put your questions in there. We will get to them at the end of the event here. And so we'll ask, the artists will get a chance to answer your questions. So thank you so much. Keep them coming. I am going to go on to Julie here, and if I can get my slide to advance, and then I'll just ask Mary if you wouldn't mind muting, and Julie's going to come on here in just a moment. Julie Fakler is known for her vibrant original domestic animal paintings and pet portraits, and she is displaying her example paintings from her Paint Your Pet classes that she facilitates. For every step-by-step class she teaches, she creates an example painting. I'm gonna show what they look like here. These generally take her 15 to 20 minutes each to make them. But so for each class that she teaches, she's got these example paintings. And so this is gonna be our chance to hear more from her about this process and how this exhibition came about. So please welcome Julie.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Mary and Anne. It's so interesting to hear everybody's process and, what inspires you and how the work is created. And this is my inspiration. Now, if you can see, this is Charlie. And as Heather said, I do pet portraits. And the Minnesota State Arts Board was gracious enough to fund my project here. And that is going to be to teach my Paint a Portrait Pet class virtually. And I'll be doing that through the Northfield Arts Guild on January 30th from 1 to 3. So go to their website, get registered, sign up for that. And if you're not in the area, you can also take the class. You may have to get some supplies, but that's what I think is going to be so exciting about the virtual class is people on the East Coast, West Coast, all over the world can take it. So get signed up for that. And as Heather said, these are the example paintings. I have one for every class I've taught. And this is Gunnar. He is from my first class. I am friends with Judy Say Willis and Tom Willis. And one day they were talking to me and they said, write a grant. And I said, what? I can't write a grant. I don't know anything about grant writing. And I said, we'll help you. So they helped me with my first Southeastern Minnesota Arts Council grant. And I did portraits of Prairies Edge Humane Society's animals to promote adoption. And then I was like, okay, we did that grant, it was successful. I'm like, write a second grant. And the second grant was to promote adoption from Safe Sanctuary, which was a local rescue group. And Judy said, I think you should teach a class this time. And again, I'm like, I've never taught, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I thought, you know, I'm going to figure it out. And I learned how to teach people how to paint how I paint. So when you take my class, I'll teach you step by step how I paint. And you can really see it in this image. That blue is underpainting. So that's the first step you do. And then we'll go to the next color, the next color. And you can see it in this one also, Tuxedo Kitty. And in the beginning, I started, I would take the youngest student and I'd be painting their animal so they could follow along. Because I didn't want to get the young guys frustrated or lagging behind. And my classes are for adults and children, and I teach them at the same time. So if you want to take the class with your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, you can do that. And it's, I think, a great experience to learn together. Next slide. This is Charlie. There's lots of paintings of Charlie. And it's my inspiration, and I love when I can help other people paint their animals, and because I can see the love for their animals. Let's see, what else? And this is my first time showing these paintings. I remember when I started doing this, my partner Paul's like, you should do an exhibit of these. And I was like, no, I don't know. They're kind of rough. They're kind of quick. But I love seeing them together. Heather did such a wonderful job of setting up the show, and they just look wonderful. Let's see. This is Yoshi. Yoshi is a dog from Faribault. Actually, I painted Yoshi's portrait. And I do commissions, and my commissions usually take, I would say, 10 to 20 hours to paint. And these, like Heather said, are 15 to 20 minutes. So they're very fast. They're very gestural. And they kind of remind me of more of a feel like I did in college. Like Anne, I started with oil paints, and I don't know why. I thought, you know, if you were a real painter, you had to work in oil for some reason. But when I got my own home studio, like Anne said, the solvents, the paints, and it just becomes a little more messy when you're in your own space. And this is Isis. After a while, I offered my Painted Portrait Pet 2.0 class. So the first class is 2 hours. The 2.0 class, you come back for a second day of 2 hours. So you kind of get to work on it more. And I think what I find fascinating is people, when they come back the second day, they're like, oh, well, maybe I should move that ear or move that eyeball, or, you know, they see it in a different light than they would just for the first 2 hours, if that makes sense. So Isis is the 2.0, and she was from this year. And there's Charlie. He's also from a 2.0 class. And you can just see it, they're kind of more finished. And I love this painting. Let's see, what else? I'd like to thank the Northfield Arts Guild. Heather does an amazing job. We are so lucky to have the Northfield Arts Guild. And down the street is the Paradise Center for the Arts and the Owatonna Arts Center. We have lots of great opportunities to show our work in the area. And of course, Minnesota supports its artists.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Oh, thank you.
Your paintings just always make everybody smile. And how you were talking about the gestural qualities to them, you really capture the animal's personality. I mean, I can't believe these are 15 to 20-minute paintings. It's just incredible.
Probably closer to an hour.
Gotcha. Perfect. And so I'm going to encourage folks to come and see. Woody is another one that's up in person. You can see him. And you can just tell that he doesn't ever sit still. Like from the painting, you totally captured that. And so it's really fun to see all of these.
I am going to advance the slideshow if I can get it to cooperate. We are now at the question and answer time. So I am going to invite all the artists to unmute. This is our chance to answer some of the questions from attendees. Anne, I'm going to start with you. There was a question here that says, most of your pieces don't really have a central focal point. Where do you start? Do you like the eye to focus anywhere in particular? Wander across the landscape of the canvas? Do you envision these pieces as one small snapshot of an infinite field of view? And then related to that, so where do you start and how do you do, and then do you, as you're reworking the pieces, do you ever go back to a piece and say, nope, that's a dead end, and then entirely decide to discard it? So as you're working on it, and then what happens if you say no?
Yeah. Well, with my pieces, in terms of focal points, I usually think of there being multifocal points in the piece. Since they're abstractions, I'm not necessarily trying to create a specific representation of something that you would see. So for me, it's a lot of, have always been sort of a formalist with composition. So it's always about balance to me in terms of the structure of the piece, how it relates to the edges, how what's in that you see on the painting relates to the edges of the piece as an object. And so it's always this kind of back and forth play with the different formal elements. It's very much for me an intuitive, a mixture of an intuitive process with an analytical process of assessing as I'm going along what's happening. So I really love the idea of chance marks, and like when I'm pouring paint or splattering paint initially on the piece, I just let that be on the piece without trying to control it. And then I like to come back and sort of insert something more formal, like for instance, like patterns or some kind of geometric form, and then I kind of relate that to what happened before and try to create some kind of relationship with those things. And in that kind of process, you're going to have some winners and losers, and I have lots of losers. The other day, as the new year turned, I took a bunch of canvases to the garbage that just weren't going to work. And I tried really hard to get them to form into something. And it just, sometimes you got to just get rid of some and start over. Sometimes I just put some away that I feel like there's something there about it. And I just come back to it because I feel like there's a little bit of magic in there that I want to try to pull out. And so I'll save something, and sometimes that works in the end, but it is good to let things go, because I learned, whether I kept it or threw it away, I learned something from that process about where I wanted to go with the next pieces that I want to make. So it's just one of those things where I always want to try to get something new out of it, and keep pushing it. So
cool. Thank you. That's great insights into your process. Mary, something that Anne said while she was describing that, the chance marks. Mary, it made me think of your field and fence line pieces, and you had spontaneous chance marks in there, and Julie too, you have very gestural, spontaneous chance. So all of you are kind of using that concept. Mary, there's a question for you here. Did you see any prairie burns? And if so, was it different than you originally envisioned it?
Yes, it was very different than I envisioned it, because when I first learned about prairie burns, I actually learned, my son told me about a prairie burn he observed when he was driving on the freeway, and I had no idea what they were. So I asked him to describe it to me. And I don't think he knew that much about them, but he described it to me in great detail. And I made a painting based on that description, and it became a very popular subject for our gallery with all kinds of people interacting and talking to me about these prairie burns. And I thought, wow, this is really exciting. But I saw some, I later looked at photos of them, and I told my husband, I said, I have to go, I have to see a real prairie burn. And so when I finally had the opportunity to see some burns, yes, it was amazing to watch the process, to see how organized and actually controlled it is, but also to see the transformation happening. The fire, for example, I had no idea that there would be these tornadoes of fire that would swirl up from the force of the heat and the wind. The smoke, was amazing. And then to see the transformation, what the prairie grasses looked like at the beginning, and then what happened to them at the end. And it was all very, very inspiring to me in my project.
Thanks for sharing.
Mhm.
Another question for Mary. Your pieces have so much detail and close range. How much attention do you pay to the close range detail versus the overall composition? And did you intend to include visual tricks such as wood strips that morph into burlap as you approach the piece?
No, I didn't intend. I'll go backwards on this question because I didn't really intend anything. I was just playing around, and that was one of the things one of the freedoms I wanted to allow myself this year is the opportunity to make a lot of mistakes, to make failures, to explore. And this is something I tell when I have workshops, I tell my art students this. I said, don't be afraid to fail and make mistakes, explore. And I had this chance to do this year. It's kind of makes me smile to think that somebody would say I have so much detail, because to me, I feel like, one of my painting teachers once said to me, Mary, you paint like, you use your brushes like a jackhammer. So I feel like I have this rough kind of clumsy approach. It's interesting to hear somebody say that I have such detail in my work.
Thanks for answering that. Julie, got a question here for you that says, do you work from a photo or do you reference the photo initially? How does that work?
For the class, we reference the photo the whole time. And I guess when I do my other paintings, I do too. I like to see, what's the distance between the ears, the eyeballs, and I like to take my own photos of the animals I paint though.
Yeah. How do you, if you're going to make a large painting of it, how do you translate a small photo to get it on the canvas with the right proportions and all of that?
Just by eye.
Okay, cool. And
bring it out in the underpainting and.
Gotcha. Cool. All things that people will learn when they take your class.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Here is a piece or a question for all artists here. Which piece in the show is most important to you? The one that you would like the viewer to be inspired further to connect with nature because of your work? And yeah, so most important piece that you want folks to come and take a look at either in the video or in person.
I'll take it.
Great.
I have, because from my work, I have to say the most exciting piece for me is the paper, the handmade paper that I made, because to me it's magical. It's about that transformation, and I just love the way they have a presence in the shapes of those papers, and how I had one intention. I wanted to use them for one thing, and they turned out to be something completely different. And I like the idea of the renewal. If you add water, the transformation and the renewal, because you add water and you come back, you bring forth that life again and energy, that life force.
Well, thanks, Mary. Anne, a key piece in this exhibit for you?
Well, first, I really hate that question because it's really hard to say that, because I feel like all the pieces are sort of parts of the whole puzzle or part of the whole series. But I guess just symbolically, I'd probably come back to the labyrinth piece, the one with the green and the metallic gold background, just as sort of conceptually representing the idea of how I make my paintings, how I think of it as this journey of discovery, and something that's, there's always something, a bit of a mystery to me about the creative process. And that's why I keep coming back to it and just, want to continue making things in the future.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones too. Personally, I love that piece. Julie, is there a key piece?
I would say the Charlie 2.0, probably because he's my dog, but I really like how that painting turned out and the heavy black lines on that one.
Sure. Cool, and I'm going to give a chance here, just a couple more minutes if anybody else wants to type in another question for our artists. But one thing I'm curious about is, did these bodies of work inspire you to continue exploring these themes? Is there something that's unfinished, or you got started, or you're excited to work on next? What's coming up next for you, either as a result of this body of work or something now you're going to try?
I'll take it. I just want to say that this, to me, it feels like it's just the beginning for me, and that I have a lot of tests that I've done, and I would like to explore this further, and it's been a blast. I've really enjoyed it. It's really been an exciting year for me.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Mary. I think, that's going back to the one reason why I think having the opportunity to get a which is an enormous thing, because you just feel like there's pressure, of course, to make work for the show and all of that, but you also feel like you have this space to think and explore and not be afraid that, oh my gosh, I have to make this work because I want to try to sell it, which is always great to do, but if it doesn't happen, that's okay. But you still have that chance to get the materials that you need and do the research that you need so that you can try something else. And I just feel like I definitely have learned some things that has really inspired me to just keep on with this series, because I agree with Mary, it feels like just the beginning. Like I felt like the year went by so fast, and I still have a lot of stuff that I want to do yet. So yeah.
To be continued. Yeah, Julie.
I create pet portraits and I just keep at it, and I can see the progression of my work over the years, and I'm just excited to see where that goes. And the grant that I got from the Minnesota State Arts Board, I love the grants because they give you deadlines and they force you to do the work. So I'm really excited to see where the virtual paint a portrait of pet class goes to.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. We have one more question, Mary, here. Do you feel like your work is serving as a bridge between rural and urban communities?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I just have to say that, I didn't grow up on a farm, and I wasn't familiar with what was happening with the prairies and the soil health and the land. And this was my opportunity to be a conduit for both sides. And even though I'm not a scientist or an expert, I felt like it was an opportunity for me to share my journey with everyone and the things I have learned about the farm, in the soil health, in the farmers, and the prairie enthusiasts, and I'm actually honored to be able to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your time and giving us this opportunity to showcase you. All of us in attendance will do a virtual round of applause. Yay! Just imagine us all celebrating and giving you a toast. We have recorded this event, so if there's folks that had to tune in a little bit later, or somebody you want to share this with, it will be up on the Guild's YouTube page by tomorrow, and so you can share that.
And I will encourage folks to come on down to the Guild downtown location. The galleries are open each week, Thursday and Friday, noon to 5, and Saturday, 11 to 4. So you'll have through February 6th to take in this work in person. And if you're not coming in person, that's just fine. We do have a virtual tour of nature seen and unseen on the Guild's website and on our YouTube page. So I encourage you to check that out. There's also an exhibition catalog, and any sales will benefit both the artist and the Guild. So I'd encourage you to check out the catalog too. In the next couple of weeks, we'll be hearing again from Anne and from Mary. We're going to do some artist interviews. And then closer into February/March, we're going to do an artist interview with Julie too. But January 21st, Anne will do an interview then, and January 28th with Mary. So I would encourage you to check back in the next couple of weeks for those opportunities. And as Julie mentioned, registrations are being taken for her January 30th Paint Your Pet class. And she'll show you how she does this magic. And so, and you can paint your pet. You can find all the details to everything I just mentioned on the Guild website, northfieldartsguild.org. And I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in tonight and celebrating these artists with us. So thank you and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.